Good morning, Pak Zikri. My name is Amar Syed Rabani from NM10. Today I'm going to present my midterm essay talking about the electrification policy and national energy mix transformation with the subject of energy decision and policies. This presentation examines how Indonesia electrification policy support the transformation of the national energy mix, balancing climate commitments, economic growth, and structural reform. The first slide shows the strategic context uh, with the breakdown of the electrification and energy transition. Indonesia's electrification policy is central to achieving enhanced NDC commitment for 2030 and then 31% renewable energy share by 2050. And the ultimate goal is to achieve net zero emission by 2060. The transition occurs amid rapid GDP growth, rising electricity demand, and persistent coal dependence. Energy transformation is therefore not only a climate strategy, but also an economic and structural reform agenda shaped by RUN, RUKN, RUPTL, those kind of document from the internal side, while for the external document, like the JETP framework. Moving to the next slide, it is the current energy mix reality. I got the data from the current RUPTL 2025 until 2034. Indonesia's electricity mix remains heavily dependent on coal, as you can see here on the figure at the right side, which is increased from approximately 56% in 2015 to about 67% in 2023. Gas usage has gradually declined, and then oil use has fallen significantly. As you can see, at the black side is very limited at 2024. However, the renewable energy has remained relatively stagnant, stable at 12 until 14%. This indicates that while policy ambition toward decarbonization is strong, however, the structural dependence on fossil fuels still dominant. And Java, as you can see at the bottom figure, still the main concentrated demand with the high population, industrial activity, and economic output drive significantly higher electricity demand, which is explained why the region relies heavily on stable base load generation, such as coal, reflected in its 75.6% non-renewable energy. It is the highest among the other area, Sumatra, Kalimantan, Sulawesi, and the eastern part of Indonesia. So this slide talking about the rising electricity demand and structural pressures. The electricity demand projection of Indonesia is increased annually until 2034, quite different compared to the previous RUPTL. The electricity demand increased from 203 terawatt hour in 2015 to a projected 323 terawatt hour by 2025, and is expected to continue rising due to the GDP growth, the urbanization, the downstream industrialization, Prabowonomics, of course, and near universal household electrification. Urban demand and industrial expansion across Indonesia area further intensify system pressure. Rising demand requires substantial investment in the generation, grid infrastructure, and system flexibility. This slide highlights the economic trade-off embedded in Indonesia's energy system, energy economics, cost structure, and subsidy distortion. So Indonesia's energy policy reflects a trade-off between first economic growth, then the economic security, and the last one, environmental sustainability. Fossil fuel subsidies reaching approximately 500 trillion rupiah, as you can see at the figure, distort price signals, and reduce renewable competitiveness. The scenario comparison chart shows how subsidy and compensation burdens vary depending on energy pathway choices. The visual supports the argument that renewable pathway, despite upfront costs, reduce long-term fiscal pressure and emission exposures. Moving to the next slide, this is the conceptual framework, connects household resources, external condition, and electricity consumption behavior. Electrification significantly improve human development indicators, especially in rural areas. Access to electricity enhance productivity, education, healthcare access, and income generation. However, consumption disparities persist between the urban or inner city and the rural or the outside households due to the differences in appliance ownership and economic capacity. The electrification is therefore both an energy policy and a development policy instrument. This slide shifts focus to institutional structures, market design constraint in the power sectors because PLN is the one and only entity in Indonesia that operate the electricity business. The government give the subsidy to PLN and incentive to IPP, the power coming from both PLN power plant and IPP, and then the energy transfer to the customer through the transmission and distribution, and the payment get from the electricity tariff multiple by the energy used by the customer. PLN's dominance and regulated tariffs reduce competitive pressure and private investment appetite. Procurement inefficiencies and unbalanced PPA increase financial risk, slowing renewable deployment. The key message here is that technical potential exists, but market design limits the acceleration of energy transition. So this slide outlines the solution, which is the market reform and financial innovation. Accelerating renewable deployment requires some criteria, consists of PPA restructuring with balanced risk allocation, and then transparent competitive procurement, carbon pricing, and emission trading. So we have to activate the renewable energy certificates as well as green finance like green sukuk, fintech, and so on and so forth. So the aspiration net zero emission by 2060 need a large amount of investment, even it reached 700 billion US dollar to get the net zero emission by 2060. The main idea here, market reform is essential to mobilize private capital and improve system efficiency. This slide explains why renewable investment remains low despite policy targets. Yeah, the government fragmentation and investment barriers. As you can see at the figure, PLN has a lot of stakeholders, the direct influence and indirect influence. The direct influence from the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources, and then the Ministry of Finance. And nowadays, they also got supervised by the Nantara, and the indirect coming from the Ministry of State-owned Enterprise, the Ministry of Environment and Forestry, and from the Ministry of National Development Planning or Bappenas. And PLN itself has to heard the aspiration from the parliament and the local parliament. uh, the renewable investment faces structural barriers consisting of the regulatory uncertainty and policy revisions, overlapping institutional authority, fossil fuel lock-in, especially from the coal, financing constraints, bureaucratic complexity. Uh, the key message is fragmented governance, increased project risk, and delay implementation. The emphasis on fragmented governance highlights that coordination failure rather than lack of ambition is a central barrier. The comparison figure illustrates the pathway with and without coal phase out, while coal retirement presents short-term socio-economic risks such as job losses in coal regions, fiscal instability, local economic disruption. On the other end, it also have opportunities like lower long-term system costs, reduce carbon exposure, and improve air quality. The visual strengthen the argument that a just transition requires fairness, stakeholder inclusion, and adaptive governance to balance risk and the opportunities from the energy transition. The interview-based figure quantifies perceived barriers, reinforcing that regulatory uncertainty and weak coordination are repeatedly cited challenges. Major structural barriers include regulatory uncertainty and frequent policy revision, limited fiscal incentives for renewables, weak intergovernmental coordination, insufficient institutional capacity, and delayed renewable energy law ratification. And uh, it can be observed more detail at the figure on the right side. Addressing this requires unified regulatory frameworks, improve procurement governance, fossil subsidy allocation, and strengthen institutional capacity. And this is the energy mix projection. The data is from RUPTL 2025 until 2034 for the medium-term outlook, and for the long-term direction, sourced from RUKN 2025 until 2060. From the medium-term outlook, the main idea is coal remain the dominant energy source through 2034. Then the renewable energy shows gradual but steady growth. Gas continue as transitional energy sources. Oil and import play a minor role, and the energy transition is progressive, not disruptive. The main idea is policy targets are aligned with net zero emission in 2060. Together, the visual communicate the Indonesia transition is progressive, not abrupt. The key takeaway is that policy consistency across decades is essential for full decarbonization, even though it already stated in the document, we have a lot of document, but we have to make sure all the project can be executed uh, in the upcoming. This is the final slides. The final slides synthesize the entire presentation. The energy transition is shaped by the interaction of energy economics, market design, and macro governance. Technically and economically, renewable transition is feasible for sure. However, its speed depends on institutional reform, fiscal realignment, and justice integration. The concluding message is powerful that Indonesia's energy transition challenge is structural and institutional, not technological. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you, Pak Zikri. It is very interesting to discuss how Indonesia can accelerate its energy transition through coordinated structural reform. Once again, thank you. Good afternoon.